Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I think we are just about ready to get started. Great seeing many of you here. I know we'll have a few more folks joining us here in a few minutes, but I'll go ahead and kick us off. I'm Rachel Stevens. I'm the Program Director for Workforce Development and Economic Policy at the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices. And I'm really excited to be with you all today for a discussion on entrepreneurship initiatives for recovery and growth and ways states are providing access to knowledge. And this is really going to be focused about partnership efforts that are geared toward helping connect aspiring entrepreneurs, particularly those from historically underrepresented and underserved communities, and getting them exposed to entrepreneurial pathways, access to the training, mentorship, skills, and financing opportunities and know-how that they need to be able to be entrepreneurs themselves, and how governors and states can really think about this as a strategy to advance equity in the workforce and the economy and really support economic recovery and growth. So I will go ahead and kick us off on our next slide here, tell you a little bit about what we're doing today. After a brief introduction from me and to kind of orient you all around some of our work, I'll be turning it over to our partner supporting our webinar series on entrepreneurship this year. Jason Wiens has joined us from the Kauffman Foundation, so I'll introduce him shortly. We'll then have some fantastic panelists. My team's put together a wonderful panel of speakers from states to discuss some initiatives they've undertaken that are showing some early signs of success. Before we go into a moderated discussion with audience Q&A with one of my colleagues and team members, Lauren Shimonik, who's a senior analyst on my team who specializes in workforce development. And then we'll have some closing remarks from our panelists after our Q&A dialogue. Next slide, please. So quick background to NGA for any of you who've joined us who may not be familiar with who we are and what we do. NGA is the nation's only nonpartisan membership organization representing the governors of our 55 states and territories. Through NGA, governors have an opportunity to learn from one another, exchange best practices and promising solutions, share common frustrations and challenges, and work together to speak with one voice when there is bipartisan agreement among governors on matters of national or global policy. My team sits in the NGA Center for Best Practices, which serves as the nation's only research and consulting firm that is focused on directly serving governors, as well as their executives across their cabinet agencies, helping them really develop, implement innovative solutions to today's most pressing public policy challenges. Next slide, please. In the center, you'll see here we have a range of program areas we cover, everything from cybersecurity to health systems, infrastructure, K-12 education, all the way to workforce development and economic policy. And as you all are well aware, you don't need me to tell you just how much of a priority for every governor, really making sure the economic environment in their state is conducive to entrepreneurship, business growth, thriving communities, thriving individuals, and opportunities for individuals to really achieve family-sustaining careers. That's really a priority for every single governor. And so it's a really important part of the work the NGA Center does, and my team's honored to support that. We provide a range of services, customized technical assistance, research and published reports, as well as peer learning opportunities for states to come together and learn from panels of experts as well as from one another, like the opportunity that brings us together here today. Next slide, please. So it's a little bit about us, and as I mentioned, governors really are prioritizing this work, and recently, really thinking about, a renewed energy around the idea that entrepreneurship can really be a pathway to expanding access to economic opportunity and participation and success. So really excited to have been working with the Kauffman Foundation, a longtime friend and partner of NGA, to develop this series. And really, their America's New Business Plan and Start Us Up Now Coalition have been a real kind of grounding force in how we've designed this workshop series. So I'm pleased to be joined by Jason Wiens, the Policy Director in Entrepreneurship at the Kauffman Foundation, to talk more about this work and why it's so important right now.
Thank you, Rachel. And thanks everyone for being with us this afternoon. As Rachel said, my name is Jason Wiens. I lead the Kauffman Foundation's entrepreneurship policy work. If you're not familiar with the Kauffman Foundation, we are a nonpartisan private philanthropy based in Kansas City. To build an economy that works for all people, we believe that entrepreneurship must be at the center of economic development policies, programs, and practices. Because when government prioritizes support for entrepreneurs, a lot of good things happen. New businesses started by entrepreneurs create nearly all net new jobs in the economy. They bring innovations to market and they revitalize communities. Unfortunately, however, barriers to entrepreneurship make starting a business harder than it needs to be. Women, people of color, those who live in rural communities face extra challenges when it comes to starting a business. Across all demographics, we see in our work at Kauffman that entrepreneurs report some of their biggest challenges are real practical ones, such as, just having the knowledge and the know-how about how do you start, operate, and grow a business. And given that many entrepreneurs weren't taught the skills that they need in order to successfully launch a business as part of their formal education or training, they learn as they go. They seek support from other business owners and from organizations that offer support and coaching. Rachel mentioned America's New Business Plan. That's our nonpartisan entrepreneurship policy roadmap that was created with input from entrepreneurs across the country. That policy agenda tackles these needs and other needs that entrepreneurs have. It's been real exciting for us at Kauffman to be able to work with NGA to produce this series of webinars on these key needs that are addressed in America's New Business Plan: funding, opportunity, support, and knowledge. Today's the third webinar in our series, and we're going to be talking about efforts to connect aspiring entrepreneurs, particularly those from historically underrepresented and underserved populations, to entrepreneurial pathways. As we explore ways to strengthen entrepreneurs' access to know-how and the skills needed to start a business, there are two things that I encourage us to think about today during the webinar. First, how can workforce training be reimagined around the individual and his or her desires for a career, and a little bit less around the needs of a corporation? And second, how can workforce training better equip individuals with a mix of industry credentials and entrepreneurial skills so that Americans are positioned for long-term success, whether they are an employee, self-employed, or a business owner? These are some of the questions that we're asking at the Kauffman Foundation, and which America's New Business Plan begins to answer. I'm looking forward today to the presentations and a discussion of these and other key issues. Lauren Shemanek, Senior Policy Analyst for the Workforce Development and Economic Policy Program at NGA Center for Best Practices, is going to moderate our webinar today. And so Lauren, I'm going to turn it over to you and let us get right into the discussion.
All right, well, thank you, Jason, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. This is an incredibly important conversation, especially as governors are thinking about how to increase access to economic opportunity for all communities and populations within states. Equitable access to entrepreneurial pathways are a fabulous mechanism for economic growth, and they help, especially now when we think about the post-pandemic labor market and the choices individuals can make about career transitions and reskilling into being entrepreneurs and opening small businesses and helping an engine within their region. As Jason mentioned, all entrepreneurs face barriers, but one of the things that we wanted to talk about today, and one of the things that the workforce system prioritizes, is helping to serve and create access to those that have been historically underrepresented and underserved: women, people of color, those in rural communities, our veterans, individuals with disabilities. They do face greater barriers. So there is an interconnection between economic and workforce development we often hear when we work with states. There's also a disconnect as well. We're lucky to have some panelists with us today that will talk about how we can more seamlessly blend and understand what that connection is between workforce and skills training and economic development, which also seeks to develop a talent pipeline. We want to know more about entrepreneurial skills training and entrepreneurial pathways and the know-how to start a business, but we also want to know how can individuals, as Jason mentioned, who do not have a background, but have a desire and interest and drive to want to become an entrepreneur, where do they start? Where do they gain that mentorship? How do they find different types of resources and capital to be able to start those businesses? And what does that long-term trajectory look like, especially when thinking about supportive services, the type of supportive services available through the workforce system? And also, Jason mentioned reimagining workforce training. There's a great opportunity with the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act to increase, scale, and sustain entrepreneurial skills training. So we want to hear about some of the challenges and barriers, as well as some of the opportunities. We want to hear about what's going on in states and how they support entrepreneurial ecosystems, and how some of these targeted investments to priority populations can really be the foundation for not just lifelong self-sufficiency, but also into making sure that people can access what it is that they would like to do and be able to do that over a long period of time. So I would like to turn now to one of our first panelists. And we want to understand how states are providing access to resources and support for entrepreneurs interested in knowing how to start a business. So with us today, we have Neela Molgaard, Executive Director with Launch Minnesota. Launch Minnesota is a part of Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, or DEED for short. DEED specializes in being able to have workforce training as well as economic development in all of their operational and administrative functions. As the Executive Director of Launch Minnesota, which is an initiative from the state agency, Neela's role is to create an environment to support entrepreneurs by empowering and elevating Minnesota's innovation ecosystem. So without further ado, Neela, tell us about your work and about Launch Minnesota.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. And I've had the honor to help create and lead Launch Minnesota. It's a new statewide initiative to empower and elevate Minnesota's innovation ecosystem that connects, convenes, and catalyzes efforts statewide by bringing together public and private organizations from diverse sectors and industries. We want Minnesota to be the best place to start and scale new ventures by providing access to capital, connectivity, and expertise. Launch Minnesota is taking a holistic approach, as you can see in this photo, to grow an already strong entrepreneurial ecosystem. While startups and innovators are our core focus, we know that the inclusion of all sectors is critical to the creation and longevity of a vibrant innovation ecosystem. We are working to bring together entrepreneurial support orgs, higher ed institutions, investors, corporate innovators, and governments to better serve our state's startups. Launch Minnesota is serving as that front door or a central touch point for our startup ecosystem. Minnesota has had a long history of being a good place where ideas begin and grow. New slide. But as a state, we recognized that we needed to do more to nurture the development of startups. Cities and states that are creating an attractive environment for entrepreneurs are quickly distancing their economies from those that don't. States that want to stay competitive in a global economy must focus on entrepreneurship. As we know, entrepreneurship and innovation create wealth. It also builds communities and grows the economy. If we could just show the next slide. That's why our Governor Walz, our state legislators, and Commissioner Grove established Launch Minnesota just 2 years ago. As a testament to the traction and community support, the Minnesota state legislators reauthorized funding for Launch Minnesota for 4 more years. We've shown that we can create a return on investment and involvement while leveling the playing field for all entrepreneurs. And just last week, Governor Walz and Commissioner Grove launched a new campaign and website called Join Us MN, which highlights the resources available to those who wish to start and scale a business here in Minnesota. Launch is excited to be part of the Join Us MN initiative and to help Minnesotans build what matters. Launch Minnesota is executing on 3 key goals. We were pleased to know that they align well with the Kaufman's goals in the new business plan. Next slide. The first goal is to increase access to capital through our innovation grants, tax credits, and loans. All prioritize communities that usually lack access to capital and populations that are underrepresented, such as women, minorities, veterans, and rural communities across Minnesota. To date, we have allocated over $3 million of undiluted grant funding, and 60% of those grants have gone to businesses with targeted founders. The next slide, we show that we are working to reduce barriers for entrepreneurs by cultivating a collaborative and connected culture to support startups at every stage of their startup journey. We created a statewide network, a first of its kind hub and spoke model, bringing together 6 regions, 8 hubs, and over 80 program partners. This was created in the spring of 2020, so impeccable timing. What we did is we asked individuals to look beyond their city and organization and place the entrepreneur at the center to support that full life cycle of businesses. These partners include higher ed institutions, incubators, accelerators, co-working spaces, SBDC offices. This network comes together on a regular cadence, customizing their local offerings, but accessing statewide best practices. Due to this creation of the Launch Network, we actually entered into the competition sponsored by the US Small Business Administration, which resulted in Minnesota receiving the SBA Super Connector Award, along with 4 other initiatives across the nation. The SBA has obviously identified that a connected and coordinated ecosystem is beneficial to entrepreneurship. The next slide, we are working with our partners to help entrepreneurs with the know-how to start a business and bring those ideas to reality by developing entrepreneurial talent, wrapping up education, and access to subject matter expertise. We do this in a handful of ways. First is through education. We have partnered with the University of Minnesota to offer lean startup education, and programming that was exclusive to the university faculty and staff are now accessible to entrepreneurs across the state. Cities locally have also partnered with other private providers of this type of education. So far, we've trained over 900 individuals, and many have received certificates from the University of Minnesota or the Min-State system. We've also created a partnership with the University of Minnesota to leverage their expertise to help our innovation grantees, our over 100 grantees, move their business forward with their proven accelerator program, the Discovery Launchpad, and now we're branding it Discovery Launchpad MN, providing that one-to-one assistance with advisors. We created also the Minnesota Exchange Platform, powered by Kinetic, a local startup and one of our grantees, to help entrepreneurs find those right connections at the right time, no matter where they live. We are now also leaning into industry partners to establish a process to connect innovators to experts and resources in their specific industry. Next slide. In closing, here's what I know to be true. Government plays a role. We have an ability to fill the gaps in the ecosystem that other organizations cannot or aren't incentivized to fill. We need to create opportunity for all. We need to cut the red tape for entrepreneurs by putting their needs first. Entrepreneurs need a clear pathway to people and resources. We've seen the difference greater connectivity, dollars, and education make. It levels the playing field for our underrepresented businesses. And I've seen firsthand that innovation isn't limited to the coast or urban settings. With the right elements, innovation can happen anywhere. Thank you for your time.
Neela, thank you. I have to agree. I do believe that government does play a role, and it's great to hear about the efforts in Minnesota. And we would love to hear more about what's going on in Minnesota, as well as your thoughts, especially around the observation of innovation can happen anywhere, because that is so very much true. We'd like to turn now to work that has been happening at the national level in support of state and regional efforts in California and in Philadelphia, as well as other locations, to strengthen the entrepreneurial ecosystem for opportunity youth looking for access to foundational skills and assistance in navigating the steps to starting a business. So with us today, we have Yelena Nimoy, Senior Program Manager, Aspen Institute Forum for Community Solutions. Yelena was a former project manager at the National Youth Employment Coalition and a former youth services provider focusing on dropout prevention and homelessness. She's going to bring this perspective and expertise to her presentation and the following discussion. Yelena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lauren, for this introduction and for bringing us all together today. Lovely to be with everyone. Next slide, please. So before I start talking about entrepreneurship work, I wanted to take just a few minutes to frame the larger context of our work. We focus on opportunity youth, who are young people between the ages of 16 and 24 who are not in school or working. As of 2019, there were about 4.4 million opportunity youth in the US, but we anticipate that because of the COVID-19 pandemic, that number is likely closer to 6 million now. Next slide, please. And we know that opportunity youth experience significant, I'm sorry, one slide up, a few slides up. And one more. No, one slide up, sorry. You just had the right slide, Katie. Thank you. It wouldn't be a Zoom webinar without technical challenges, right? So we know that opportunity youth experience significant disadvantages. Compared to their peers, they're more likely to live in poverty, have a disability, they're more likely not to complete high school or post-secondary education, or to become parents at a young age. We also know that young people of color, particularly young men of color, experience disproportionate rates of disconnection from school and work. And so taken together, those challenges result in significant personal and financial costs to young people themselves, but also our communities and our country. Next slide, please. So the Opportunity Youth Forum is a network of place-based urban, suburban, and tribal community cross-system, cross-sector collaboratives, all working to improve education, career, and life outcomes for opportunity youth. Since our launch in 2012, the OYF has focused specifically on racial, cultural, and economic equity and gender justice to account for those disparities I just discussed. The Forum for Community Solutions is the intermediary of the OYF, and we provide funding opportunities, convening, and other learning opportunities, data, research, and evaluation support to OYF member sites. So we are primarily a systems change initiative, but we're also focused on youth outcomes with several initiatives that support specific pathways for opportunity youth. And the Youth Entrepreneurship Fund, the YEF, was launched in 2017 in response to high interest in entrepreneurship pathways from our communities and young people. It supported 3 communities, as Lauren mentioned, Del Norte County and Tribal Rands. This is in rural Northern California, San Francisco, and Philadelphia, with 3 years of funding to design and implement entrepreneurship pathways for opportunity youth in collaboration with partners that represented various facets of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Those communities focused on young people who are underrepresented in entrepreneurship, so opportunity youth, and intersecting with young people of color, rural young people, indigenous youth, and youth residing in public housing. And the goal was not just to teach entrepreneurship, but to really connect participants to other partners in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, so as to provide a continuum of opportunities, and that could include hands-on learning, financial capability education, connection to business competitions and incubators, mentorship, other business development support, and even microfinancing. We really, as one of our goals, wanted to explore and start systematizing what works for this population of aspiring entrepreneurs, but also identify what are some of the gaps and supports in that ecosystem that's available to underrepresented young entrepreneurs. Next slide, please. Thank you. One slide up. This was just a sampling. The slide you just saw was a sampling of partners that were involved in this project, and I'm not going to go through those, but they included community-based organizations, curriculum providers, incubators, workforce agencies. So really just the types of partners that Nila was just highlighting, that we know that young people and all entrepreneurs need access to. Collaboratives did not work specifically with the states, but you could see some of those intersections and partnerships. And so over the 3 years of this initiative, we learned quite a bit of what works for this population. And so we identified 6 main buckets of sorts of lessons. So one is really that curriculum was critically important. The quality, the time that young people spend in class, it provided young people with opportunity to develop that entrepreneurial mindset, not just the know-how, but really the ability to think like an entrepreneur. We found, however, that places like NIFTY, which is Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, and other CBOs that create curricula, they're mostly developed for in-school youth. And so for our population, it just needed to be modified and adjusted. And also it needed to, frankly, be made more culturally competent to work with opportunity youth specifically. So all 3 sites developed that young people did develop those skills that fall under the definition of that entrepreneurial mindset. So that's self-efficacy, creativity, innovation, communication, collaboration, risk-taking, ability to kind of understand and process failure, and leadership skills. And many young people actually became interested in social entrepreneurship, and they wanted to launch the types of businesses that their community really needed. This was specifically true in rural and indigenous lands in Del Norte County. And many other young people realized that entrepreneurship right now wasn't for them, and they just wanted to hone some of those technical skills that they would need, that know how to launch a specific business. We also realized that we really needed to reframe success in many ways. So for example, we owe Title I youth funds. They can be used to support entrepreneurship, but they have a pretty rigid set of performance measures that don't necessarily translate to those more qualitative outcomes like entrepreneurial mindset that we're seeing in those programs. And programs are also funded for 12 to 18 months, and they're expected to really scale those services to a large number of young people. That's not necessarily realistic in rural communities, and it's also not necessarily realistic for opportunity youth, who we know really thrive in smaller cohorts and more one-on-one support. And this is not just true for WIOA, this is also true for private philanthropy as well. Next slide, please. So we also found that in these communities, especially in rural Del Norte, there were significant gaps in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. When we talked to youth, they were very clear about what support services and tools they needed to be able to launch a business of their own. And those included hands-on opportunities such as job shadowing small business owners. They wanted mentorship by other entrepreneurs. They wanted to access those tools and resources such as financial capability tools or microfinance or grants. They wanted access again to those resources that Nila discussed: makerspaces, shared workspaces, incubators, small business development organizations. And often those opportunities just do not exist everywhere. Obviously, San Francisco and Philadelphia are hubs for entrepreneurship, but that's not necessarily true for rural America or for our tribal communities. And so at the same time, when those opportunities do exist, they often serve adults. And so we found that places such as Renaissance Entrepreneurship Center, which is a fantastic organization, a business incubator that serves underrepresented adult entrepreneurs, really needed to think about how do we adjust our services to serve young people. And, this is why, the big lesson for us is that collaboration is really essential. A single program just cannot provide young people with this range of supports and experiences, and it cannot respond to all of the needs that young people have. This is really where that robust entrepreneurship ecosystem can be critical in both expanding opportunity, but also pushing local systems to create a more conducive environment and an expanded set of support for entrepreneurs. And finally, collaborative ecosystem building work, it requires long-term investment to ensure sustainability of those partnerships and programs. This is really even more important in rural and tribal communities, which contend with historical disinvestment. And that often means that even though those communities really see entrepreneurship as an important aspect of equitable, sustainable, and community-driven economic development, they just do not have infrastructure that they need to meaningfully support entrepreneurship. And final slide, please. So if you're interested in learning more, we co-produced 2 reports with another program at the Aspen Institute here, the Business Ownership Initiative and the Economic Opportunities Program, who have a range of expertise really in working with underrepresented entrepreneurs. And we produced those papers to document some of the work and go into more details of the lessons I just discussed. Thank you.
Elena, thank you. I think the couple slides that you had on lessons learned were incredibly key, and would love to know more, especially around thinking about a 21st century economy and the mindset skills, changing the way that we talk about skill development, I think is key. And then also reframing success. Would love to get in a conversation with panelists today. We started with, Nila talking about aligning goals and that goal alignment, and then what does success look like and how do you measure that? All these things are key when we think about how you scale and sustain state efforts, these initiative efforts, and then also at the training provider and programmatic level. And that's where we're going to turn next. We're going to now talk with Eric Parker, co-founder and CEO at Make Startups. We want to hear Eric's perspective on how Make Startups is leveraging public-private partnerships and partnering with Georgia's local workforce areas, and also some of the challenges as well as opportunities in trying to scale and sustain programmatic opportunities for individuals looking to start a business. And I love Eric's story because he's coming at this from a perspective as an architect. And really, when we think about workforce and economic development, a lot of it is around infrastructure. So an architect specializing in innovation and R&D facilities for many of the top companies and institutions in the world, and then bringing that perspective to the programmatic level. Make Startups provides local community partners, feasibility studies, advocacy support, training, accreditation assessments, and software to provide employment, wage, and economic impact reporting. Founded a nonprofit to study and improve entrepreneur ecosystem development. And Eric, we want to hear all about the program. So take it away.
Hi, thank you very much for the opportunity today. I think I'll actually start with a little bit of how an architect ends up starting a nonprofit to look into entrepreneurship and how to support it. And it's really that, I was running my own architecture practice in Silicon Valley. I had had it for about 10 years, and then the market collapsed in 2008. And in the span of 1 week, I had every single client call to put their project on hold. And I realized that my life as an entrepreneur had gotten a lot more complicated. And so I really spent the next few years digging into why that was and how we could build more resilient systems. And so if you look, there's some basic data that I think we've all probably covered in different aspects of what we do, but it's that ultimately startups are disproportionately responsible for the innovations and productivity growth in our economy. They account for virtually all net new job creation, but that furthermore, a lot of the disparities that we're experiencing as a society that are then the byproduct of the fact that 50% of new ventures are really clustered in just 20 counties around America where investment is taking place in them. So if we can go to the next slide. We ended up starting the Clubhouse in 2010, which is actually, it began as a makerspace in Augusta, Georgia, that also offered co-working and was really just a community center for entrepreneurs and techies that wanted to get together. But we did a lot of work in helping them get businesses off the ground and try to make this change in our local community. Some commonalities that we began to find, and these problems really become exacerbated for disadvantaged entrepreneurs in the community, are that at least 83% of entrepreneurs are not able to access bank loans or venture capital when they start their business. 65% are relying on personal or family savings for their startup capital, and close to 10% carry balances on their personal credit cards. And one of the things that we run into is a lot of times disadvantaged entrepreneurs in the community don't actually have a bank account or a credit history of any kind that they can lean on. And so this becomes an impossible hill to climb. But through this, I want to tell you that we have had the experience of helping over 200 businesses in our community get started over those 10 years. And this type of work has created in 1,500 jobs that have really made a difference in our local economy. And so, that really leads next slide to kind of how can we better help the disadvantaged entrepreneurs in our community. And I think what we have to do is we have to look at what are the core challenges around that. So first off, underserved entrepreneurs, they can't afford training. And so that means that there has to be some sort of economic model that's created to support that effort. The first thing that we run into is that private investment capital is generally not equipped to absorb those training costs. And then all the entrepreneur support organizations like the Clubhouse in Augusta, Georgia, or whatever makerspace or co-working space or small incubator that's not attached to a university in your community, they're all competing for a very small number of limited philanthropic grants and government grants and so forth. They're highly competitive and it's very difficult to get, and none of them last more than a couple of years. And so then ends up being no recurring revenues to support this work, and therefore the practice around that work can't grow, and it's really hard to invest in the efficacy of that. So next slide. So our solution really began with looking at how the workforce development system could begin to address that. And so we really dug into how does workforce funding operate? And it's centered around the idea of industry credentials. So we looked at financial institutions as that industry recognizing body for entrepreneurship. And what we did is we went to a number of banks, CDFIs, micro lenders, angel investment funds, venture capital funds. And we basically said, if we were to measure certain skills that entrepreneurs might learn, and we were able to demonstrate that they had gained the knowledge in those, would you be able to improve access to capital for them? And the thesis came back with the answer, yes, that they would be able to do that. So we work with all of those organizations to measure about 90 different points that relate to business planning, finance, technology, and law. And then we develop and manage the training standards so that a local community organization can use their curriculum. So we've tried to very much structure so that any community can use whatever curriculum that they have already been using, and we try to help them qualify in for workforce funding. And then we develop software that ties into an entrepreneur's accounting software so that we're able to pull the records automatically for whether they have been able to create a job for themselves, create a job for others, what those wages are, and ultimately what the economic impact of each business is, as well as each program that's operated in a community. So next slide. So once we put that in place, we started looking then more specifically across the state of Georgia. And so these are data points that come from Kaufman's indicators of entrepreneurship. And so if you look at the state of Georgia, 0.36% of our population starts a business every year. A little bit over 76% of our startups survive the first year. And on average, they create 5.38 jobs. To put that in perspective, entrepreneurship is responsible for about 40,000 jobs a year in the state of Georgia. Next slide. So then what we did is we took a look at Augusta specifically in our local area. And so if you take our poverty rates and our unemployment rates, what you're able to do is translate that with the entrepreneurship rates. And you can see that there's 760 startups per year. 213 of those are disadvantaged entrepreneurs that are trying to start a business that needs support. And so what we realized is that if we can use the workforce development system to support those entrepreneurs, that means that there's 163 businesses in our community every year that can be supported, and they can create almost 900 jobs and ultimately, a $30 million direct local economic impact. And the actual investment from the workforce system would be pretty small to do that. Small in some perspectives, but obviously 1.2 million is a lot of money. So next slide. So what I wanted to do here is then go back to taking those numbers at the state level. And so if you look at the state poverty rates and unemployment rates, there's over 6,000 disadvantaged entrepreneurs trying to start a business in our state every year. Ultimately, it's a 25,000 job impact if we're able to support them with training and then improve access to capital for them. And it's a massive economic impact that's available. And this led us to a grant from Georgia's Partnership for Inclusive Innovation. So next slide. So we applied for a grant with Georgia's Partnership for Inclusive Innovation to help 5 organizations throughout the state. The idea was that we would create a mesh network between them so that each of the organizations could collaborate with one another, and that we would use the workforce system to provide certificate programs for entrepreneurs in each one of these communities that essentially functions as a pre-accelerator program. Our goal through this grant is to unlock 1.2 million in workforce funds and ultimately train 250 entrepreneurs and launch 200 businesses across that network. Next slide. So this effort started in the spring of this year. We issued a call for entrepreneur support organizations across the state. We ultimately selected 5 organizations, one in Augusta, Savannah, Macon, Columbus, and Atlanta. The way we did that is we established a rubric for each one of those where each one of them had to demonstrate that they had support from their local workforce development office, as well as support from capital partners, and that they had to reach into the disadvantaged entrepreneur community. So with that said, if you look at any one of these areas, they cover a pretty broad geographic zone, and even the ones that are covering the most rural parts of the state are still serving what would amount to about 500 disadvantaged entrepreneurs a year. So next slide. So now I want to tell you about what's happened so far. So we actually have had some programs underway, and So far, program demographics that it's 100% entrepreneurs of color, 87% women, 25% active or retired military. Ultimately, we've had 100% of the businesses get a business license. 50% of them, after, like I said, just 3 months, have already acquired their first customer, and we've already had somebody create a job in the community. I wanted to tell you a story, stories about a couple of them. So Tanya Gibbons, the lady wearing the pink coat, so she actually had started a business before COVID hit, and the business was pretty well shut down as a byproduct of what happened with the pandemic. And so she was really looking for support to come in. Since our program launched, she's actually been able to grow. She's paying herself, creating a good salary and doing well with a PR and marketing agency. So that's one type of business. Georgia Alexander, who's the lady next to her, she's actually retiring from the military right now. And so she became a vegan a couple of years ago and wanted to start a vegan restaurant. Through our program, she's actually been able to acquire a loan to get her restaurant started and has signed a lease on the facility and is going to have that open soon. Another entrepreneur who's not in the photo, her name is Connie, and she was unemployed. She was very passionate about how to get healthy food into schools. And so over the first 12 weeks of the program, she was actually able to begin selling produce that she was able to grow on her property into our local, we have a local farmer network. So we helped her connect in with that. She's been able to hire an employee and she's been doing well. So I say that to let you know that the types of entrepreneurs that are served through these programs really cover a wide variety. We have a couple of tech businesses in there, but you can see it's lifestyle businesses, restaurants, all sorts of things. Next slide. But then I also wanted to talk to you about sort of the barriers that we've faced in trying to pull this program together at a statewide level. So the biggest issue that we run into, I think the best way to describe it is discrimination, that at the workforce level, there's a lot of perception bias against entrepreneurship as a viable career pathway. And if you look at them, for the most part, entrepreneurship isn't even included within the career services aspect of what they do. And so if they don't include entrepreneurship as a career service, they're not going to identify that as a path, and they're not going to want to fund the entrepreneurs that go through. In fact, we had one workforce area that we work with in the state that that would only agree to fund 2 entrepreneurs in the program because the workforce director specifically didn't believe in it. And if the workforce director is going to discriminate against entrepreneurship as a pathway, then obviously it's something that becomes unsustainable to do. And really, I think that most of this centers around the eligibility and suitability criteria, as well as the performance indicators around the program. You can see that, you know, in the state of Georgia, only 6% of businesses make payroll within the first 8 quarters. That's because, generally speaking, entrepreneurs are spending all of that time reinvesting back into their business. And so a big part of what we do is train them on the importance of paying themselves in that process. But historically, employment in the 2nd and 4th quarter and wages earned is not the best measure of whether a business is going to succeed. And I think that's something that we need to have a conversation about. And then the other issue is that because of the intense nature of entrepreneurship programs, they generally are very long programs. So our training programs in each community is 9 months long. It includes a tremendous amount of wraparound services to support the entrepreneurs. And so they all really factor in at the top end of the budget caps of a local workforce area. So next slide. But what I wanted to do really before I move on from this is to just look at, you know, the sort of scale of need. And you might be wondering, why am I showing you a picture of Waco, Texas? I do that because Waco, Texas is the 200th largest city in America. And what we did is we applied the same calculator of the startup rates, you know, the new entrepreneur rates, the startup survival rates, the job creation rates, poverty rate, and unemployment rate by the population of McLennan County in Texas, which is where Waco is, our 200th largest city in America. And you can see through that there's 217 disadvantaged entrepreneurs in Waco trying to start a business. And if they can be supported, that means 173 businesses that can survive and close to 1,000 jobs in the community. We actually created a calculator on our website that you can go to at makestartups.com/policy, and you can find out exactly how many disadvantaged entrepreneurs are in any county in America, as well as any state. Next slide. And I say that because I wanted to really help everyone understand the scale of opportunity that exists through workforce development. You know, our goal over the next 5 years is to help programs be created in all 50 states so that we can reach all, you know, of the 200 largest cities in America, as well as getting into rural communities. And if we do that, we think we can help, you know, 10,000 disadvantaged entrepreneurs be trained every year and unlock, you know, a significant amount of federal investment and commercial capital, and that will result in 40,000 new jobs every year from entrepreneurs. So thank you.
Eric, thank you. You know, first of all, I can appreciate my background is in workforce development and working at the state level. And again, going back to, you know, just some of my opening talking points is that alignment between workforce and economic development. And if indeed some of the barriers are about how we're measuring what success looks like, not necessarily the purposes of sustainability and scaling programs and opportunities that work, you know, then we might want to take a look at that so that we can better align and also communicate where there's further opportunities to strengthen those partnerships between state, local, and workforce and economic development. And I think the other thing too is, and this was a question that has come up that I'll take back to all the panelists, but you touched upon it, is really around measuring skills. So that is another form of measurement, but how does that translate into any type of certification or credential? What does that mean? For you, it was having more access to capital. But what does that mean necessarily? As Yelena talked about, sometimes these are just some foundational skills. If given a choice after going through a portion of the program, is there something that someone that has gone through the program can take with them where these are transferable skills and it communicates to an employer or to anybody that they would be looking to further engage for some type of economic opportunity? So I think that there's a lot there. And you know, we want to make sure that we have time for additional audience Q&A. I did have some questions for our panelists, and to open it up into discussion with everybody here just really has been edifying and learning from you all the work that you're doing. And it makes me reconsider how I approach workforce development and thinking about what does that mean to have entrepreneurial skills training embedded in that type of discussion. But real quickly, want to move on to some questions that I had while we wait for some audience Q&A to pop up in the Q&A box. Again, those in attendance, please feel free to add your questions and we'll get to them and incorporate them. But Yelena, I wanted to come back to you, also invite the other panelists here, Eric and Mila, to respond. But based upon the lessons learned from the Youth Entrepreneurship Fund, you know, it primarily took place at the regional level, but and you did mention about, you know, connectivity to states, but what are the opportunities you see for states to create strategies and leverage the type of investments that have been made in the initiative and overall support entrepreneurial ecosystems? And can states play a larger role? And what challenges do you see?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I want to start by saying that overall, state support has been a challenge in general when advancing the Opportunity Youth agenda. So I'm speaking a little bit from that perspective. I think there are definitely bright spots, but it has been challenging to get states to focus on vulnerable young people. Historically, we've had more success on city level. So you saw when I flashed up that slide with city partnerships, you know, there were departments of commerce and city economic development agencies and child welfare agencies who really see the value in advancing this population. And we've had some success on the federal level as well, but on the state level support, that has been a little bit of a challenge. I think specifically for entrepreneurship, I think this is because we have a sense of what the adult entrepreneurial ecosystem is and what are the outcomes that we want. It's a little more difficult for young people. You can't really say, here's the pathway for young people. Here's where they might veer off. Lauren, you mentioned those transferable skills. here's the population that might go all the way through. Here are some gaps in the ecosystem where we need some maybe policy change or investment. And I think for states, it's probably difficult to see the role specifically in the youth entrepreneurship field when we don't really have that framework, which is part of the reason that we did the work that we did and are continuing to think about it. But I think I was really struck by Jason's introduction because that's something I wanted to mention. States really should include entrepreneurship in any type of equitable economic development initiative, and ensuring that underrepresented entrepreneurs such as opportunity youth are prioritized, I think, is key. And I think really thinking about what it is that entrepreneurs need and want, and what it is that community needs and wants, and not just necessarily focusing on employers, is really important. I think states can support those microfinance options for underrepresented entrepreneurs who otherwise would have a difficulty obtaining a traditional loan. Otherwise, for young people, it's especially relevant, right? A young person just realistically cannot get a loan. I think states could incentivize community colleges to create those spaces for entrepreneurs, like hubs or maker spaces that can be open to everyone in the community. Oftentimes, community colleges have those resources, but they're only open to students. When workforce investment boards put out RFPs for WIOA providers, is there support for entrepreneurship programs in there, or do they say, like Eric mentioned, we just don't believe in it? I think just really the most critical thing that states can do is collaborate and invest in youth-serving programs and pathways. I might be biased here, but I always think that expertise is really on the ground. It's in young people themselves, and it's in the providers, and they know what it is that they need. They know what supports they need. Young people told us very, very clearly, this is what I need to launch a business. And so if we think from that kind of perspective and root our design of statewide initiatives or citywide initiative in what providers or young people are telling us, I think that would lead to more equitable programs that really place those entrepreneurial needs at the center.
Excellent, thank you, Elena. We did have a question come in, and so I'm just going to jump to you, Neela. One of the questions, really think that the work in Minnesota is incredible. We agree. Of course, that's why we wanted to invite you to talk more about it. But the question is how have employers responded to the entrepreneurship credentials? Thinking from that employability standpoint, and do the credentials signal a specified skill set to employers?
The certifications that I was referring to were more for certifications for our startup community, making sure that they had the know-how to properly launch their business on that value proposition and lean startup methodology. So what our certification is through our partners, academic partners, is a signal to our investor community and others in our startup ecosystem that they have done some homework and they have really validated their business idea and talked to their customers and have had some of that training. Now, some of the other work done in the state with my colleagues on the workforce side, they have implemented the Coursera curriculum, and a lot of our entrepreneurs have taken advantage of the Coursera training through that workforce side, and that is being looked at by employers when you're looking at some of the next gen trainings and future job skill sets that has been highly used. And employers are looking at those certifications. The ones that I was talking about, that was more specifically that disconnect between our investor community and our startup community, and making sure that they had the know-how and education they needed to propel their business forward.
That makes sense. And also the partnership that Minnesota has with Coursera and the role that partnership played in the midst of the pandemic and now onward too. Would love to hear more as you learn more about what that strength in connectivity, especially for entrepreneurs, being able to get some additional skills through the platform. But yeah, that's a fantastic partnership, and thank you for the question. Eric, I'm just going to jump back to you real quick. You mentioned about being able to measure skill attainment, and what does the certification and credentialing process look like in your program?
Yeah, we really centered it around, like I said, 4 different pillars: business planning, finance, technology, and law. And what we do is we measure skills for every entrepreneur when they start a program. We provide assessments for them every 3 weeks based on whatever schedule they're being taught locally, and then we provide them with a final skills assessment at the end. If they're able to complete those and show that they improve their skills as well as attain the business license, then we offer them a provisional certificate of entrepreneurship that they can use to go to financial institutions in their community to access capital. And then they basically are assigned a mentor to work with for 6 months while they use that capital to grow their business.
Excellent. So often conversations in states too are about how you measure skill attainment, but then what does that mean for having some type of certification and credential, and what does that symbolize? And then also around the portability and the ability to build off of that. So I think that that is also an important conversation. Would love to continue to have a discussion both with you, Neela, and Eric about the feasibility and portability around those certifications. I know that we're getting close to time. It's, we should really schedule these for 90 minutes and we can have a really robust conversation. Hey, I'm not doing anything the rest of the afternoon, so I would love that. But I do know that you are all incredibly busy, and I wanted to make sure that we got to kind of a key question for the group here. And it's really a large question. We've talked a lot about the connection between state, local, and regional. We've touched upon having a national initiative that is really in partnership with regions and localities. And, again, the question for Yelena was, what can states do to support opportunity? But we want to think about this as well from the federal level and federal partnerships that many of our states have, and offer some food for thought. So from your perspective, and really thinking about the Start Us Up, America's New Business Plan knowledge pillar and policy recommendations, but also mechanisms for strengthening support, what are your priority considerations for what can be done at the federal level to better support states in removing barriers, creating strategies, strengthening partnerships, assessing policies, all to enable the scalability and sustainability around opportunities for creating access to entrepreneurial pathways? That's a pretty big question, but just would love your ideas about what are your recommendations around either policies or around some type of additional support for states. And Neela, I'm going to go ahead and start with you.
Okay. Yeah, this is a really important time, an inflection point in our history and our economy. We have the research, the data from Kaufman. We know what we need to do and should do to inspire entrepreneurship. I think a couple of your points. First, when we talk about breaking down barriers, we need to make it easier for businesses to engage and find the tools they need to start and scale their new ventures. And second, we need to create strategies to strengthen partnerships at all levels. Our model in Minnesota is gaining momentum, but it's not without its challenges. In my role, I look at what's in our control. And one way is how we award funding, and the other is the ability to amplify the stories of our businesses and the importance of our startup community and the role it plays in our economy today and tomorrow. So I think that amplification is really important. The startups that we serve, our high-tech, high-growth startups, don't have a storefront on Main Street. Their impact is sometimes harder for some to see or to show. So, what I hear from our partners frequently is we need to continue to amplify that story at the local levels of the important role that our startups face. And because of the way that the funding has been limited or siloed, I know we need to be also more creative with Eric's insight today. But unfortunately, we're seeing some challenges and some burnout with our local champions in our startup ecosystems. And that's not personal to Minnesota at all. It's a national concern, and you can read about it in numerous articles. But that is one way. The ability for us to continue to incentivize collaboration and not competition is important to really cultivate that fertile soil to grow businesses. And I've seen the most progress when multiple sectors are working together. That's where I'm seeing the most impact, when we're bringing private industry, our universities, our nonprofits, all together to serve our businesses. That's the most impactful. And I love an African proverb. I just have to share this quickly. I say it frequently, but it's terribly relevant to when we're talking about building entrepreneurial pathways. And that's that African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together.
Excellent. Thank you. Great concluding thought. Eric.
Sure. So I think that the real opportunity that exists, at the federal level, obviously, WIOA is up for reauthorization, and the core problem that we're all going to have around entrepreneurship within workforce really deals with the performance indicators around that. I think one of the easiest ways to deal with that is to look at classifying entrepreneurship separately, much like employer-based training was done in the previous version of WIOA. And then that allows for creating separate eligibility, suitability, and performance requirements around that. I think that the way a state can best support that effort right now, one would be to use its discretionary budget to give some program flexibility at the local level so that local workforce directors don't feel quite so pressured to meet those numbers. Another thing is actually use the state's ability to actually set and test unique performance requirements that it's allowed to do for programs. And then the other is just make sure that your state's workforce plan has a strategy for entrepreneurship. It's not really even included in most workforce plans at the state level.
I think some of those things are achievable in the short term, and sounds like some good long-term recommendations. Thank you, Eric. And Yelena, we're going to go ahead and close with you.
Sure. Just really want to second everything that Neela said about partnership and Eric's point about WIOA reauthorization being a big opportunity for us to rethink some of those performance metrics and entrepreneurship for young people. And then I think, I really do think we're at an inflection point too. I think we're just beginning to understand the impact that the pandemic will have on the future of work. And we're also seeing a lot of dissatisfaction from workers with the way things are used to be, especially for those industries that for us employ a lot of opportunity, like hospitality. And so as, I just feel that as, those people are exiting the workforce because of the working issues and conditions, entrepreneurship just might emerge as a path to economic self-determination and wealth building for young people who are underrepresented in the workforce. And so I would really challenge us to think about the policy or advocacy levers that we all can use depending on our role and where we see it to really create a more equitable, inclusive economy that doesn't reproduce the inequities of the current system that we have, and that really centers that person-centered approach, which is, I think, the main advantage of entrepreneurship.
Again, great concluding thoughts around just making sure to be deliberate with equity and making it human-centered, design focused. So thank you, Elena, Eric, Neela. Really appreciate this conversation today. I think our attendees and those that will be able to watch the webinar recorded will have a lot of questions and would love to follow up with you. I also want to thank Jason Wiens for joining us today and the wonderful work that Kaufman is doing, and also to our program director, Rachel Stevens, for kicking us off today. Here you can see we have our contacts. Please feel free to reach out if you have questions. As NGA, we are always happy to help facilitate those connections and be a part of a larger conversation. But this has really been, like I said, a great conversation, an important topic, and one that deserves some more attention. So thank you, everybody that joined and participated today.